Do you think you know how Sir Walter Raleigh met his end? The familiar version is simple. The great adventurer, once favored by Elizabeth I, fell from grace under King James, and on a cold October morning in 1618, he placed his neck upon the block. The executioner lifted his axe, one clean stroke fell, and Raleigh's story was finished. That is the version many of us imagine, quick, decisive, almost dignified. But the truth is far more brutal. Raleigh's death was not a single moment of steel and blood. It was a long, deliberate unraveling that stretched over 13 years. It was betrayal disguised as justice, politics masquerading as law. His end was engineered not only to remove a man, but to silence a voice. Think of it. A man who had once commanded fleets, who dreamed of empires, who wrote poetry that moved a queen, reduced to a prisoner pacing stone floors, his ambitions collapsing year by year. A man whose desperate gamble for redemption ended with his own son dead on foreign soil, and his closest ally turning a pistol on himself. A man betrayed not by enemies abroad, but by the very king he had served. By the time the axe finally fell, Raleigh had already been executed in every other way that mattered. His reputation destroyed, his family broken, his dreams buried in the jungles of Guyana. What remained was only the public spectacle, the scaffold at Westminster, the crowd, the blade, and the final cruel theater of power. This is the story of how Sir Walter Raleigh was not merely killed, but systematically dismantled. A man who spent his life chasing glory met an end that was not glorious, but calculated, humiliating, and far more brutal than you think. Walter Raleigh was born in Devon in 1552, in a world where birth could determine destiny. Yet Raleigh never allowed his birth to cage him. He studied at Oxford, fought in France, and by wit and daring worked his way into the orbit of Elizabeth I. Under Elizabeth, Raleigh flourished. He was handsome, eloquent, and ambitious, qualities the Queen found both attractive and useful. She knighted him in 1585. She granted him monopolies, estates, and offices. He became captain of the guard, warden of the stannaries, a man of parliament. He was not only a courtier but a man of action. He fought in Ireland, helped repel the Spanish threat, and sponsored colonial ventures across the Atlantic. It was Raleigh who dreamed of Roanoke, the lost colony, planting England's first fragile roots in the New World. He commanded in raids against Spain, returning with plunder and glory. He wrote poetry that circulated in court, sharp and elegant verses that impressed even the most learned. He carried himself like a man destined to stand at the center of England's future. But power under Elizabeth was always precarious. When he secretly married one of her maids of honor, Bess Throckmorton, the Queen's jealousy flared. Raleigh was briefly imprisoned. Yet even then, he managed to recover his position. He always found a way back. For nearly 2 decades, Elizabeth's favor protected him. But that protection was tied not to Raleigh's own strength, but to hers. On March 24, 1603, Elizabeth died, and with her, Raleigh's world collapsed. James VI of Scotland, newly crowned James I of England, inherited the throne, and with it Raleigh's fate. James was cautious, suspicious, and pragmatic. He valued obedience above brilliance. Where Elizabeth had rewarded Raleigh's daring, James found it threatening. The new king distrusted him immediately, seeing in him not a loyal servant but a dangerous rival. Raleigh's enemies moved quickly. Robert Cecil, now Earl of Salisbury, poisoned the king's mind against him. His estates were seized, his offices stripped, his influence erased. Then came the accusation that sealed his ruin. Raleigh was accused of treason, implicated in what became known as the Main Plot, a supposed conspiracy with Lord Cobham to overthrow James and replace him with Arabella Stuart, backed by Spanish gold. The evidence was paper-thin, based almost entirely on Cobham's unreliable testimony. But James wanted Raleigh broken, and so Raleigh was dragged before a court at Winchester. The trial was theater, not justice. Raleigh was denied counsel, forbidden to call witnesses. The Attorney General, Edward Coke, launched into him with a fury that bordered on madness, calling him an enemy to God, a viper, and a spider of hell. Raleigh, unshaken, defended himself with skill and composure. He picked apart the accusations, exposed the weakness of the evidence, and won sympathy from many watching. But it was hopeless. The verdict was foregone. Raleigh was found guilty of treason and sentenced to die the traitor's death, hanging, drawing, and quartering. Yet James hesitated. Instead of execution, Raleigh was sent to the Tower. Seemed a reprieve, but it was no mercy. It was the beginning of a slow suffocation. From 1603 to 1616, Raleigh lived as a prisoner. 13 years in the Tower of London. But Raleigh was not a man to waste time. He turned his prison into a study. He wrote, he experimented, he taught. His most ambitious work, the history of the world, poured across its pages. He dabbled in chemistry, studied medicine, even conducted scientific trials. His wife Bess was permitted to join him at times. Their children grew up partly within the Tower's walls. There were gardens to walk in, books to read, friends to correspond with. To some, it might have seemed almost a life of learning. But for Raleigh it was a prison all the same. The sea was gone. The new world was gone. His reputation waned with every passing year. To a man of such restless ambition, each day was another nail in the coffin. Still, he never stopped dreaming of El Dorado, the golden city he had described years before, hidden in the jungles of Guyana. In his mind, that dream grew brighter the longer he remained locked away. And eventually that dream gave him one last chance at freedom. By 1616, Raleigh's patience had worn thin. 13 years in the Tower had left him weakened, but not defeated. He began pressing for release. His proposal was bold. Allow him to sail once more to Guyana, to the banks of the Orinoco, where he believed the golden city of El Dorado still waited. To Raleigh it was more than gold. It was redemption. If he returned with treasure, he could enrich the crown, restore his honor, and prove his loyalty. King James agreed, but under strict conditions. Raleigh was warned that he must not attack the Spanish. England's fragile peace with Spain could not be broken. If he violated that peace, the consequences would be his alone to bear. Raleigh accepted, though in truth he must have known how slim his chances were. He was in his 60s now, scarred by illness and confinement. But the dream of gold still burned, and with it the faint hope that he might reclaim the life he had lost. In June 1617 he set sail. At his side was his eldest surviving son, Walter, known as What. For Raleigh, it was a chance to pass his legacy to his child. For What, it was the promise of adventure and glory. The voyage dragged on, plagued by storms, sickness, and discontent. When Raleigh finally reached the coast of Guyana, he was too ill to lead his men upriver. He remained at base camp, entrusting command to his loyal lieutenant, Lawrence Kemys. Kemys pressed on, guiding the men along the Orinoco in search of gold. But instead of riches, they found Spanish resistance. A fortified settlement stood in their path. Against Raleigh's explicit orders, Kemys attacked. The clash was brief and bloody. Spanish gunfire tore through the English ranks. In the chaos, young What Raleigh was struck and killed. The dream that had sustained Raleigh for years ended with the death of his son. Kemys returned, broken and ashamed. He confessed his failure, told Raleigh the truth, and then, overwhelmed with guilt, took his own life. The expedition had yielded nothing. No gold, no victory, only grief and ruin. When Raleigh sailed back toward England, he knew the price of failure would be terrible. Raleigh arrived in England empty-handed. The Spanish ambassador demanded punishment. Spain accused Raleigh of breaking the peace by attacking their settlement, and they were right. James could not ignore it. Peace with Spain was vital to his rule, and Raleigh was expendable. The king did not arrange a new trial. He did not hear new evidence. Instead, he revived the old sentence from 13 years earlier. The guilty verdict of 1603, suspended for more than a decade, was now enforced. Raleigh's fate had been sealed long before he ever left for Guyana. The expedition was not a chance at redemption. It was a trap that had closed around him. On the night before his death, Raleigh prepared himself with calm resolve. He wrote a final letter to his wife, Bess, urging her to remain strong and to care for their son Carew. He spoke of his faith, his love, and his acceptance of what was to come. At dawn he rose, ate a simple breakfast, and dressed with care. He refused despair. Those who saw him that morning noted his composure, his quiet courage. When the guards came for him, he walked without resistance. He was ready to meet the scaffold. On October 29, 1618, Sir Walter Raleigh mounted the scaffold at Westminster. A crowd had gathered to watch. Some came out of duty, others from morbid curiosity. Many came because Raleigh was no ordinary prisoner. He was a man whose name still carried weight, whose fall symbolized the ruthlessness of power. Raleigh addressed the people with dignity. He denied treason, but offered no bitterness. He forgave his enemies, praised the king, and declared himself ready to die. When he examined the axe, he remarked with dry humor, "This is a sharp medicine, but it is a cure for all diseases." The executioner hesitated. Raleigh looked him in the eye and said firmly, "Strike, man, strike." The axe came down. But the first blow was not clean. A second was required. Only then did Raleigh's life end. His head was displayed to the crowd, then placed in a red leather bag. His wife Bess claimed it, and kept it with her until her own death. For years, Raleigh's skull remained a relic of loyalty and grief, carried by the woman who had loved him through disgrace and loss. With Raleigh's death, James had rid himself of a problem and satisfied the demands of Spain. But history did not remember Raleigh as a traitor. It remembered him as a victim of politics, a man destroyed not for his crimes, but for his convenience. His dreams of El Dorado faded into legend. His writings, his poetry, and his courage at the end preserved his memory. Even his enemies could not deny the calm strength with which he faced the axe. The truth of his death lies not in the final stroke of steel, but in the long years that preceded it, years of betrayal, captivity, and despair. His real execution began in 1603, when James stripped him of power and condemned him in spirit, long before the scaffold. Sir Walter Raleigh's end was not the swift justice of a traitor. It was the slow murder of a man who once stood at the heart of an empire's ambition, reduced to a cautionary tale of politics, betrayal, and the brutality of power.